Boom. The air seemed to crack as Karen, the HOA president, stood on my front lawn, her face twisted with rage, waving a pistol in my face. My heart stopped. My name's Ethan, a regular guy living a quiet life by Lake Serenity, a 150-year-old. Treasure that's been in my family for generations. Never in my wildest dreams did I think my peaceful lakeside home would become the stage for a showdown, straight out of a Hollywood thriller. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind where the breeze carries the scent of pine and the water sparkles like a sheet of diamonds. I was fixing a fishing rod on my porch when Karen's SUV screeched into my driveway. Kicking up gravel like a storm, she stormed toward me, her designer sunglasses glinting. Her voice shrill enough to scare the birds from the trees. "This lake is HOA property now, Ethan?" she bellowed, jabbing the gun toward me. "You're in violation of our bylaws, and I'm here to enforce them." My stomach churned as I raised my hands, trying to stay calm despite the cold steel glinting in the sunlight. Lake Serenity wasn't just a body of water, it was my family's legacy. Pristine, spring-fed lake where my great-great-grandfather built our cabin in the 1870s. My kids learned to swim here. My dad taught me to fish here, and every summer we'd gather for barbecues under the stars. It was our sanctuary, and it was private property. Completely outside the HOA's gated community nearby, Karen, though, didn't care about history or facts. She was the queen bee of the Willow Creek HOA, a neighborhood of cookie-cutter mansions that sprouted up a decade ago, just a half-mile from my cabin. She'd been eyeing my lake for years, dreaming of turning it into a community asset, with boat rentals and picnic pavilions to boost her prestige. Her claim? Some dusty HOA bylaw about shared water resources that she insisted gave her the right to seize my lake. I'd laughed off her earlier letters, thinking she was just a power-hungry busybody. But now, with a gun in my face and her eyes wild with entitlement, I realized this was no joke. She was unhinged, and I was in real danger, Karen. "Put that thing down," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. "You can't just claim my property. It's not part of your HOA." Her lips curled into a sneer. "You'll see, Ethan. You'll sign it over, or I'll make your life hell." She lowered the gun but didn't holster it, backing toward her SUV while shouting about fines and lawsuits. My hands shook as I dialed 911 the moment she peeled out. The police arrived within minutes, confiscating her gun and issuing a stern warning. But Karen's smug grin as she left told me this was far from over. That night, I couldn't sleep. My wife Sarah sat with me at the kitchen table, her face pale as we replayed the incident. Our kids, asleep upstairs, had no idea how close we'd come to disaster. I kept picturing my great-grandfather's journal, tucked in my desk, describing how he'd cleared the land around Lake Serenity with his own hands, dreaming of a place for his family to thrive. The thought of Karen stealing that legacy made my blood boil. I wasn't just fighting for a lakai, I was fighting for my family's history, for every memory etched into the ripples of that water. But Karen's stunt wasn't a one-off. She'd been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, ruling the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Neighbors whispered about her tactics. Outrageous fines for unapproved mailboxes, bullying elderly residents into compliance, even forcing one family to repaint their house because the shade of blue clashed with her vision. She'd turned Willow Creek into her kingdom, and my lake was her next conquest. The police report gave me some breathing room, but I knew she'd come back with more tricks, legal or otherwise. I couldn't let her win, not after she'd threatened me on my own land, in front of my home with my family inside. As I stared out at the lake, its surface glowing under the moonlight, a fire sparked inside me. Karen thought she could intimidate me, but she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. I wasn't going to just defend my lake, I was going to take her down, and I'd do it in a way she'd never see coming. This wasn't just about saving my property anymore. It was about justice, about showing a bully that she couldn't push people around forever. That gun-waving moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a battle that would change everything. Karen's gun-waving stunt was just the opening shot in a war I never asked for. After the police left, I thought maybe she'd back off, chastened by the law. I was dead wrong. The next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with a crisp, official-looking letter from the Willow Creek HOA, printed on embossed letterhead that screamed self-important bureaucracy. The letter claimed my lake was causing environmental disturbances and needed to be reallocated for community use. Attached was a fine for $500, citing unpermitted water usage. By the end of the week, 2 more letters arrived, each with new fines: $1,000 for obstructing community access and $750 for non-compliant landscaping around my private dock. I stared at the papers, dumbfounded. My dock was a weathered wooden platform my dad and I built when I was a kid, hardly a threat to anyone's aesthetic. The harassment didn't stop at paperwork. One morning, I woke to find orange construction cones blocking my driveway, with a handwritten note claiming the HOA was conducting road maintenance. There was no maintenance crew, no equipment, just a petty attempt to make my life difficult. I kicked the cones aside, but the next day they were back, this time with a chain looped through them. My wife Sarah was furious, worried about how we'd get the kids to school if this kept up. Then came the inspectors, men in cheap polo shirts with clipboards, sniffing around my property line, snapping photos, and muttering about violations. One even had the nerve to step onto my dock, claiming he needed to test the water quality. I sent him packing, but the intrusion left me rattled. I started talking to my neighbors in Willow Creek, the ones trapped under the HOA's thumb. Over coffee at the local diner, they spilled stories that made my blood run cold. Karen, it turned out, was a tyrant who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. There was Mrs. Larson, a sweet retiree who'd been fined $2,000 for planting roses in her front yard without approval. Another family was forced to repaint their house because Karen deemed their sage green too dull. One neighbor, Tom, whispered about a couple who'd moved away after Karen's relentless fines drove them into debt. "She's like a dictator," Tom said, glancing over his shoulder as if Karen might be lurking. "She loves the power, and she's obsessed with your lake." Gah. I dug into the HOA's bylaws, a 50-page document so dense it could double as a doorstop. The clause Karen was leaning on, a single line about shared water resources, was flimsy at best. My property predated the HOA by over a century, and the deed was ironclad, passed down through my family with clear boundaries. Karen's claim wouldn't hold up in court, but fighting her there would be a nightmare. Legal fees could drain our savings, and the process might drag on for years. Plus, Karen had deep pockets, rumored to come from her husband's real estate business. And she wasn't above playing dirty. The neighbors told me she'd once hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on a board member who dared challenge her. That board member resigned a week later, humiliated. The harassment escalated. One evening, I caught a teenager hired by who-knows-who-spray-painting HOA property on my fence. I chased him off, but the graffiti was a gut punch. Sarah started keeping the kids inside, worried about what Karen might do next. I felt like a prisoner on my own land, constantly looking over my shoulder. But the more I learned about Karen's tactics, the angrier I got. She wasn't just coming for my lake, she was trying to break me, to wear me down, until I gave up. That's when I realized playing defense wasn't enough. I needed to fight back, not with fists or lawyers, but with something smarter, something that would hit Karen where it hurt most, her precious control. Late one night, unable to sleep, I stumbled across a Reddit thread about HOAs gone wild. One user mentioned a guy who'd turned the tables by joining the HOA and taking it over. The idea hit me like a lightning bolt. What if I could infiltrate Willow Creek's HOA, gain enough power to stop Karen, and protect my lake for good? It was a long shot, but I was desperate. I started digging into the HOA's structure, pulling public records from the county clerk's office. What I found was a treasure trove. The HOA was in financial trouble. Bleeding money from Karen's extravagant projects, $10,000 fountains, $5,000 for her own driveway's upgrades, even $3,000 for a community newsletter. That was just a glossy photo of her smiling. The board was too scared to challenge her, but the residents were fed up, whispering about rebellion. I saw my opening. If I could get voting power in the HOA, I could flip the script and take her down. The idea hit me like a thunderbolt at 2 a.m. while scrolling through a Reddit thread about rogue HOAs. One user told a story of a guy who'd turned the tables by joining his HOA and seizing control. Could I do that? Could I, Ethan? A guy who'd rather be fishing than fighting bureaucrats, take over the Willow Creek HOA and stop Karen in her tracks. It sounded crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like my only shot. Karen wasn't going to stop her gun waving her. Fines, her inspectors, were all part of a war to wear me down. I wasn't going to let her steal Lake's serenity, not after my family had poured their hearts into it for 150 years. I needed to fight fire with fire, and that meant getting inside the HOA's walls. First, I had to understand the battlefield. I spent days at the county clerk's office, pulling every public record I could find on the Willow Creek HOA. What I uncovered was a gold mine. The HOA was drowning in debt to over $100,000 in the red thanks to Karen's reckless spending. There were invoices for $15,000, fountains that looked like they belonged in Vegas, $5,000 for landscaping enhancements to Karen's own property, and even $3,000 for a glossy newsletter featuring her smiling face. The board, a group of spineless yes-men, had rubber-stamped every expense, too afraid of Karen's wrath to object. But the residents, they were fed up. HOA fees had skyrocketed to cover the shortfall, and whispers of rebellion were growing louder. I called my old college buddy Mike, a real estate agent with a knack for sniffing out deals. "Mike," I said, "I need properties in Willow Creek, cheap ones, and I need them fast." He laughed at first, thinking I was joking, but when I explained Karen's campaign against my lake, he got serious. "You're going to take on the HOA? Man, you're nuts, but I'm in." Mike scoured foreclosure listings and found 3 homes in Willow Creek that had been repossessed by the bank. They were run down, but cheap at $10,000 total, a steal for the area. Each property came with full HOA voting rights, and that was the key. If I owned 3 homes, I'd have 3 votes in the HOA's next election, enough to shake things up if I could rally others. Draining my savings to buy those properties was a gut-wrenching decision. Sarah was nervous, her eyes wide as we sat at the kitchen table, crunching numbers. "Ethan, this is everything we've got," she said, her voice trembling. "What if it doesn't work?" I took her hand, picturing my kids playing by the lake. I said, "If we don't fight now, we'll lose everything that matters." She nodded, trusting me, and we signed the papers. Overnight, I went from an outsider to an HOA member with 3 votes in my pocket. But votes alone wouldn't be enough. Karen had loyalists. And the board election was only a month away. I started working the neighborhood like a politician on a campaign trail. I knocked on doors, shared coffee at the diner, and listened to residents' gripes. There was Mrs. Larson, whose rose garden fines had left her in tears. Tom, who'd been hit with a $1,500 fee for an unapproved shed. And the Garcias, a young couple who'd nearly lost their home over Karen's harassment. "She acts like she owns us," Tom said, clenching his mug. "Someone needs to stop her. I saw my chance." "What if we could?" I asked. "What if we vote her out and take back the HOA?" Eyes lit up, but skepticism lingered. Karen's grip was tight, and people were scared. I built my coalition carefully, meeting neighbors in secret so Karen wouldn't catch wind. I promised lower fees, transparent finances, and an end to her bullying. Slowly, I won them over. First 5 families, then 10, then 20. By my count, I had 60% of the residents ready to back me plus my 3 votes. But I needed insurance. I dug deeper into the HOA's bylaws and found a loophole. Any member could call for an emergency audit of the finances if they had enough support. If I could expose Karen's shady spending, I could turn even her loyalists against her. I also prepped for the meeting like a general planning a siege. I printed flyers outlining Karen's abuses, using public records to show her misspending. I practiced my speech, knowing I'd have one shot to sway the room. Mike helped me create a simple presentation chart showing the HOA's debt, photos of Karen's gaudy fountains, and a clear plan to fix it. My goal wasn't just to save my lake, it was to free Willow Creek from Karen's tyranny. Every night, I'd sit by Lake Serenity, its calm waters grounding me as I rehearsed. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice. The night of the Willow Creek HOA meeting felt like stepping into a gladiator arena. The community center was packed, the air thick with tension, like a storm about to break. Karen strutted in like a queen, her designer heels clicking on the linoleum, her smirk radiating confidence. She thought she had this in the bag, her loyalist board, her hand-picked supporters, and a vote lined up to seize my lake. She was certain the HOA would rubber stamp her claim to Lake Serenity, turning it into a community asset under her control. Little did she know I'd spent weeks building an army to take her down. I stood in the back, clutching my stack of flyers, my heart pounding, but my resolve steel. The room buzzed with whispers as residents glanced at me, some with hope, others with fear. Karen's reign had left everyone on edge, and no one dared challenge her openly until now. When the meeting started, Karen took the podium, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. For the good of our community, she said, we must secure Lake Serenity as a shared resource. It's time to correct this oversight. I could barely contain my rage, picturing her gun in my face, but I stayed calm. Timing was everything. When the floor opened for nominations, I stepped forward. The room fell silent. My name's Ethan Carter, I said, my voice steady. I'm a new member of this HOA, with 3 properties and 3 votes. And I nominate myself and my allies, Tom Garcia and Lisa Larson, for the board. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face turned ashen. You can't do that, she sputtered. You're not one of us. I held up my property deeds, my trump card. As of last month, I owned 3 homes in Willow Creek. Check the bylaws. The room erupted in murmurs as the secretary confirmed my eligibility. I'd spent weeks rallying 60% of the residents. But Karen still had her loyalists. The vote was a nail-biter. I passed out my flyers, charts of the HOA's debt, photos of Karen's $15,000 fountains, invoices for her personal landscaping, all public record, all damning. This is what she's done with your money, I said, pointing to the projector screen where Mike had helped me display the evidence. While she's fining you for roses and sheds, she's bankrupting the HOA for her own gain. The crowd's mood shifted. Anger replaced fear. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice shrill, but the chair shut her down, citing procedure. The vote was called. One by one, residents stood, casting ballots. Karen's loyalists held firm, but my coalition was stronger, and the results were announced me. Tom and Lisa, as the new board the room, exploded in cheers. Karen slammed her fist on the table, screaming about lawsuits, but the tide had turned. As the new president, I called an emergency audit of the HOA's finances, a move allowed by the bylaws with majority support. The crowd roared in approval. The audit was a bloodbath for Karen. We uncovered $20,000 in miscellaneous expenses, funneled to her husband's company, $5,000 for her driveway, and thousands more on her pet projects. Residents gasped as the numbers flashed on the screen. I proposed a new bylaw. No HOA could claim private property, explicitly protecting my lake. Passed unanimously, the crowd chanting, "No more Karen." Her face was a mask of fury, but she was powerless. Her board was gone, her allies silenced, her empire in ruins. As the meeting ended, residents swarmed me, shaking my hand. Some in tears, Mrs. Larson hugged me, whispering, "You gave us our neighborhood back." Karen stormed out, vowing revenge, but I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew she'd lost. The next day, I posted the audit results on the HOA's public board, ensuring every resident saw the truth. Karen's reign of terror was over, and I'd done it not with guns or threats, but with strategy and truth. The dust settled after the HOA meeting, but the victory was sweeter than I'd ever imagined. As the newly elected president of the Willow Creek HOA, I stood on the community center steps, watching Karen's SUV peel out one last time, her taillights fading into the night. The crowd of residents lingered, some shaking my hand, others hugging me with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Larson. The elderly woman, fined for her roses, grabbed my arm and whispered, "You've given us our lives back, Ethan." Tom Garcia, my new board ally, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Man, I didn't think you could pull it off." I smiled, but my mind was already racing with what came next. Taking down Karen was one thing, rebuilding the HOA into something fair and functional was another. The first order of business was cleaning up the financial mess Karen left behind. The audit we'd launched during the meeting was just the start. Over the next week, my board Tom, Lisa, and I hired an independent accountant to dig deeper. The findings were jaw-dropping. Karen had siphoned off over $50,000 in HOA funds. Over 3 years, disguising personal expenses as community improvements. There was the $15,000 fountain in the neighborhood entrance, a gaudy monstrosity that looked like a reject from a theme park. Another $10,000 went to consulting fees for her husband's company, which had no record of doing any actual work. The newsletter, her vanity project, cost $3,000 per issue, 6 issues a year, featuring her grinning face and little else. Residents were livid, and I made sure every detail was posted on the HOA's public bulletin board and website, transparency being my first promise. To fix the budget, we had to make tough calls. I proposed selling off Karen's pet projects, starting with that hideous fountain. A local salvage company bought it for $8,000, and we used the money to start paying down the HOA's $100,000 debt. We also canceled her overpriced contracts, like the $5,000 a month landscaping deal with her cousin's firm, and hired a local company for half the cost. Within a month, we'd slashed the HOA's operating expenses by 30%, and I announced a 20% reduction in resident fees at the next meeting. The cheers were deafening. Families who'd been squeezed by Karen's greed could finally breathe, and the neighborhood felt alive again, like a weight had been lifted. Karen didn't go quietly, of course. A week after the meeting, she filed a lawsuit, claiming the board election was fraudulent and demanding her presidency back. I wasn't worried. The gun incident, documented by the police report, was my ace in the hole. I hired a lawyer not to fight her in court, but to file a counterclaim for harassment and misuse of HOA funds. When the judge saw the police report, in our audit, Karen's case collapsed like a house of cards. She was ordered to pay $10,000 in legal fees to the HOA, a final nail in her coffin. Rumors spread that she'd put her house up for sale, and by the end of the month, a moving truck was parked in her driveway. Karen left Willow Creek in disgrace. Her reign of terror over for good. With the HOA stabilized, I turned my focus to protecting Lake Serenity. The new bylaw I'd passed, no HOA could claim private property, was airtight. But I wanted to ensure no one could ever try Karen's stunt again. I worked with a local land trust to place a conservation easement on my property, guaranteeing Lake Serenity would remain in my family and untouched by development forever. Standing on my dock, watching my kids splash in the water, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Karen's first threat. The lake's ripples carried the weight of my great-great-grandfather's dream, and I'd kept it safe. The neighborhood transformed too. With lower fees and a fair board, Willow Creek became a community again. Mrs. Larson planted a new rose garden, this time without fear of fines. Tom built his shed, and the Garcias hosted a block party, the first in years. I even organized a lake day, inviting neighbors to fish and picnic on my land, a gesture to show I wasn't the outsider Karen had painted me as. The laughter and music drifting across the water felt like a victory lap. My YouTube fam. This fight wasn't just about a lake hit. It was about standing up to a bully who thought she could rule with fear. I took a risk, bought into the HOA, and turned the tables, proving that strategy and heart can beat even the worst tyrants. Lake Serenity still sparkles under the sun, a testament to what we can do when we refuse to back down. You've got an HOA horror story or a tale of fighting back? Drop it in the comments. I'm reading everyone. Smash that like button. Hit subscribe and ring that bell for more epic stories of triumph. Who knew a lake could spark such a wild ride?